On the 9th of September 2022, One Nation leader Pauline Hanson published a tweet to Greens Deputy Leader Senator Mehreen Faruqi. Senator Hanson's tweet was in response to an earlier post made by Senator Faruqi where she had described the Queen, who had recently just passed, to be the leader of a racist empire built on stolen land, lives, and wealth of colonised peoples. In an attempt to express her outrage at the remarks made by the Green senator, Miss Hanson took it upon herself to share some choice words of her own, tweeting to Miss Faruqi, "It's clear you're not happy, so pack your bags and piss off back to Pakistan." With most of us now accustomed to this style of politics from Pauline, her tweet stirred up both outrage and support as ex-users flocked to the social media platform to express their opinions. Some pundits defended the actions of Senator Hanson, posting that Pauline is a great patriot of this country who upholds the values of the Australian way of life, while others were not so enthusiastic about Miss Hanson's remarks, claiming that her tweet finally revealed the true extent of Pauline's prejudice against people from ethnic minorities. Sharing the sentiments of the latter, Senator Faruqi launched legal action against Miss Hanson in May 2023, arguing that Hanson had racially discriminated against her in her Twitter post. The weeks and months that followed would set the scene for what is perhaps the most intriguing and thought-provoking tests on free speech that this country has ever seen. Faruqi's primary claim was that Hanson had breached 18C, Section 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act, an act that states that it is unlawful for someone to commit an act in public that is reasonably likely to insult, humiliate, or intimidate another person or a group of people on the basis of race, colour, or national or ethnic origin. Justice Angus Stewart, presiding over the defamation case, agreed with Ms Faruqi, ultimately ruling in favour of the Green senator, finding Ms Hanson under Bill 18C guilty of racial discrimination. This ruling ultimately determined that Miss Hanson's defence, which was centred around implied freedom of political communication, would not stand against the federally imposed bill. For free speech proponents such as myself, this ruling marked a terrifying time in our nation's history, as such determinations could have extremely damaging and unintended implications in our everyday lives. In the aftermath of the ruling, Ms Hanson made a desperate appeal on the Sky News program The Bolt Report. In a 10-minute interview, Ms Hanson discusses the emotional and financial impacts that the ruling was having on her and her political party. For those who are interested, the full interview can be found in the description below, but for the purposes of this video, we need to have a quick look at what was discussed at the beginning of the Bolt Report segment.
Nation leader. It's her first interview since that judge's decision. I've never seen her so shattered. She couldn't at first speak from crying.
Oh, sorry. Just give me a minute.
Pauline Hanson, thanks for coming on the show. I can tell how upset you are. That decision, that legal case seems to have knocked you for absolute six. What do you think about it?
What? Sorry. It has, Andrew. You know, I just feel that the country's changed so much in such a way that people can't say what they think anymore. The thought police are out there. Everyone's shut down to having an opinion. It's not the country that I grew up in. And, you know, people may criticise my comment. I've never changed since I first entered politics nearly, 30 years ago. But I think that the decision made, I think, was unfair, unjust, and a bit hard, but I'm not going to give up. I am going to appeal against it. I am going to fight this. And Andrew, it's not just about Pauline Hanson. It's about the people themselves having the right to have an opinion, to have a say. And 18C has to go. That's why I have to fight this.
In the haze of emotion and sadness, it was further revealed that Senator Hanson's efforts to defend her right to free speech was going to cost her $900,000 in legal fees, an amount that she was now going to have to pay whether she could afford to or not. The Bolt Report interview culminated with a heartfelt appeal to the wider Australian public for financial support, where Pauline stated that the High Court ruling was extremely damaging to her and her party's future, and that donations from the public might just be the only way that her and her party would be able to survive the huge financial loss. Following the interview, things went a little bit quiet for One Nation and Pauline Hanson. For some, it felt like the end of an era. Say what you will about the staunched nationalist and her populist party, one would be hard-pressed to find an Australian political figure, past or present, with more passion, determination and commitment than Pauline. From her very first moments in public office, she routinely demonstrated courage and conviction at a time when speaking up about certain political matters was considered to be deeply unfashionable. She continued to speak her mind, even when so doing evolved from deeply unfashionable to an offence worthy of prosecution, which is where we are today. And even in her prison cell in 2003, as a political prisoner, she continued to hone her thoughts and speak out against government overreach. Despite being utterly despised by the media as well as her colleagues in Parliament House, her unwavering dedication to the freedom and justice for all Australians ultimately earned Pauline the trust and respect of her fellow countrymen and women, a trust that until recently has remained unquestioned. In late 2024, a bill was introduced to Parliament in an effort to, and I'm quoting from the government's website, address rising instances of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia in Australia, particularly following on from the events occurring in October of 2023. The bill, titled the Criminal Code Amendment Hate Crimes Bill 2024, aimed to strengthen federal hate crime laws by expanding protected groups, that is, adding sex, gender, identity, disability, etc., lowering the threshold for urging violence to include recklessness, introducing new offences for threatening violence, and enhancing prohibitions on displaying hate symbols, all to better prevent and prosecute extremism and to protect vulnerable communities from serious harms like anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. If passed, the Criminal Code Amendment Hate Crimes Bill 2024 would be able to restrict an individual's speech relating to the aforementioned groups and punish offenders at a federal level. In an age where access to information and the ability to disseminate one's opinion is at its highest, the government felt it was necessary to impose further mechanisms of control, declaring itself to be the ultimate arbiter of truth. Naturally skeptical of the government's ability to determine the difference between misinformation and good old-fashioned information, it was at this point in late 2024 that I urged my friends and family to reach out to their local members in an effort to bring their attention to the fact that we do not want federally imposed restrictions on speech and that this bill must be stopped. These efforts, unfortunately, albeit predictably, fell on deaf ears. And in spite of the best efforts from those who you would traditionally expect to see speak out against excessive government overreach, Pauline Hanson and One Nation most notably, there appeared to be a landslide of support for the bill from both sides of Parliament. And on the 6th of February 2025, with 116 ayes and 11 noes, the bill was passed into federal law. As demoralising as this outcome was, there was some comfort in the knowledge that certain individuals such as Pauline Hanson do exist and are willing to fight for our ability to exercise our God-given right to verbally express ourselves. And even though this was yet another win for the power-hungry elite and a devastating time for believers of free speech like myself, it was somewhat reassuring to know that as long as we have people like Pauline, pushing back against government tyranny, then maybe, just maybe, we still have a fighting chance. But wait, what's this? Pauline Hanson absent from the vote? This can't be right. How could she be absent from the vote? Surely she voted against this bill, didn't she? This is what Pauline Hanson and One Nation are all about, right? I mean, she's built an entire career out of standing up for our right to speak freely. How could she be absent from the vote? Where was she? She should have been there, front and centre, voting against this kind of rubbish. In the haze of confusion and in the checking and rechecking to determine whether or not this was true, one look at the parliamentary records verified the unimaginable. There it was, the ballot outcome for the Criminal Code Amendment Hate Crimes Bill 2024, 116 in favour, 11 against, and 1 in the form of Pauline Hanson abstaining from the vote. Say it ain't so, Pauline. Why didn't you just vote no? I immediately felt gutted. Where was the courage that she had been so prolific in displaying through her tenure as a senator? Where was the passionate conviction to the defence of our right to free speech, which we had all become so accustomed? Why was the decision made to abstain from the vote rather than just vote no? It was only a few short months ago that Pauline was in tears, appearing on the Bolt Report, stating that people can't say what they think anymore. The thought police are out there. Everyone is shut down when having an opinion, and it's not the country I grew up in. I absolutely agree with you, Pauline. So where were you on the vote? In my despair, I put this question to Pauline in an email shortly after the passing of the bill. However, I'm still awaiting a reply. In the absence of her vote and in the absence of her reply, we are ultimately forced to draw our own conclusions. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let us take a look at the timeline of events, both leading up to and in the aftermath of her absenteeism. Suffice to say, at this point, that this is a monumental occurrence as far as I'm concerned, and it marks a definitive shift in the fundamental principles and values of Pauline Hanson's One Nation. A shift that calls her reputation as an advocate for freedom into utter disarray. As we alluded to earlier, abstaining from a parliamentary vote relating to a bill aimed at restricting speech is extremely out of character for Senator Hanson. Over the years, we have become accustomed to her unapologetic defences of it. However, when we start to examine the sequence of events that took place leading up to and following on from the passing of the bill, some serious concerns about the transparency and integrity of Pauline Hanson and One Nation begin to arise. Let's take a closer look. November 5th, 2024, 12 weeks before the bill was passed, Pauline Hanson makes an emotional appeal on Sky News where it is revealed that the senator has been ordered to pay damages and legal fees to the sum of $900,000. On the 19th of November 2024, Hanson loses her bid to have her legal costs halved, thus ordered to pay to Faruqi the full amount, an order which she intends to appeal. 6th of February 2025, the Criminal Code Amendment Hate Crimes Bill 2024 is voted into law, a vote from which Pauline Hanson and all of the other members from One Nation were most notably absent. On the 16th of February 2025, 10 days after the no-show, Pauline is offered $10 million by mining magnate Clive Palmer. Yeah, that's right, $10 million. Palmer's tie-up offer included $10 million towards the party's election chest, plus a further $500,000 towards Hanson's legal fees. His only request was that she change the name of her party from One Nation to the Clive and Pauline Party. Well, how about that for landing on your feet, Pauline? In a time of great despair, where financial ruin was a mere certainty, a renegade billionaire swoops in, offering to make all of your problems simply disappear with what is practically a no-strings-attached gift of $10 million. It will instantly, permanently solve any current or future financial problems, difficulties that your party might face, not to mention the extended supporter base that you would now inherit as a result of the now defunct United Australia Party, of which Palmer was formerly a chair. I mean, talk about hitting the jackpot. You're set. But wait, what's this? She knocked him back. She turned down his offer of $10 million? Wasn't she on the Bolt report 3 months prior pleading with the public for donations? What are you telling me? She's now flushed in the space of 3 months? It just doesn't make sense. Now, we don't want to jump to conclusions, as her abstaining from the vote may well have been a scheduling error on behalf of Pauline and her entire staff. And you might think that, hey, that's okay, we all have a miss from time to time, nothing to see here. But then something really strange happened. In a very brief interview, again on Sky, Pauline claimed that my party is not for sale and that my policies are not for sale, which is fine. But weren't you just on this exact program 3 months ago, almost $1 million in the hole, desperately pleading for donations from the public and on the cusp of winding up One Nation? How? What happened, Pauline? Where'd you get the money? Who paid your legal fees? It wasn't the public. You raised some money, but not that much. So again, where did you get the money? Also, for some unknown reason, there's absolutely no mention of Pauline physically paying any money to Senator Faruqi, or, as was requested by Faruqi, to any non-for-profit for that matter. Nor is it mentioned anywhere that Pauline attended the anti-racism training, as was ordered by the judge in her racial discrimination case. There is also nothing to suggest that Pauline has or even intends to launch an appeal, despite claiming that this was something she was going to do upon receiving the verdict. It's almost like the case simply disappeared, like someone just made it go away. We know that it wasn't Uncle Clive, so who was it? Who was it that between the 5th of November 2024, the desperate appeal for funds on Sky News, and the 16th of Feb 2025, the rejected $10 million offer, that made Pauline Hanson's financial and legal woes disappear? Was her abstaining from the vote on the 2024 hate speech laws part of the deal? A show of good faith to her new masters in exchange for this mysterious lifeline? And did she just hope that no one would notice and subsequently join up on the dots? Would she have stayed true to form and voted against the bill if Clive had have got to her first? Fast forward to today. How do we feel about her having a person like Barnaby Joyce becoming a member of her party? A man that voted in favour of the initial amendments to the hate speech laws. Yeah, that's right. As a member of the Nationals, he was a part of the 116 other politicians looking to rein in our ability to speak freely. Some questions for you guys. Is it possible that Pauline was captured by the same powers that are now running daily puff pieces on her and her party on Sky News, whose owner, Rupert Murdoch, is perhaps one of the biggest pro-Israel lobbyists in the entire world? Did this same group of people seize on their opportunity to take advantage of Pauline when she was at her most desperate, most vulnerable? Is the One Nation Party and its president, who were once a beacon of hope in a sea of unrelenting coercion, now nothing more than a mouthpiece for foreign powers in the form of controlled opposition? Personally, I really wish it wasn't the case, and that none of this were true, because I, like many others, really admire Pauline and everything she has done over the past 3 decades in defense of our freedoms. But when you really look at what transpired between the weeks of November 2024 and February of 2025, it's practically impossible not to arrive at these conclusions. That the only real explanation is that her and her party have been captured. How else do you explain the no-show regarding the 2024 hate speech laws? How else do you explain the vanishing court case? How else can you explain the rejected $10 million offer from Clive? How else can you explain her meteoric rise in popularity over the last few months and the endless barrage of airtime on Sky News? Granted, she's always been a stalwart on the program, but lately it's gone to an entirely different level. How else do you explain her inconsistencies in her rhetoric around free speech? Why is it okay to criticize one particular ethnic group, but not okay to criticize another? Is one nation in favor of free speech or not? It sounds to me like when her speech is being restricted, i.e. not being allowed to tell people to piss off back to Pakistan, then that's a problem. But when it affects other people, for instance, when people start to criticize the Israeli government's handling of the war in Gaza, the right to free speech for some reason no longer applies. And that people who make these criticisms need to be muzzled. No, jailed, actually. Logically speaking, it's not possible to be in favor of free speech whilst at the same time labeling anyone who questions Israel's methods in Gaza as anti-Semitic, which is what Pauline has done. Since the Bondi massacre, Pauline has ramped up her pro-Israeli stance, going so far as to adorn herself in the flag of Israel. Yet, at the same time, she openly admonishes anyone who does the same thing with our Indigenous flag, claiming that Australia should unite under one banner, one flag, one culture. Again, a united Australia is something that I completely agree with. So why then are you draping yourself in a foreign country's flag whilst at the same time pouring your heart out about how awful it is that our right to free speech is being taken from us, while simultaneously casting dispersions on people whose speech you don't agree with? That's the thing with free speech that Pauline doesn't quite appear to be getting. You are either in favour of it, which means that everyone gets a say, irrespective of whether or not you agree with what they are saying, or you are not in favour of it, and you act in ways to deprive and regulate the speech of those you don't agree with by punishing dissenting voices. The latter, however, somewhat ironically, is the very definition of fascism, a style of government that led to the atrocities of the Second World War, a style of government that is becoming increasingly prevalent here in this country. We need to be able to speak. We need to be able to ask questions. We need to be able to notice things. It's the only way that we can avoid repeating the mistakes of the past. It is the only way we are going to be able to make this thing we call a democracy actually work. What we need is a political party that truly represents these ends, and unfortunately, the party that we once depended on to uphold this virtue is no longer here to support